Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming in today. Sorry I'm late to minor, teeny tiny animal related emergency. Taken care of. All good. So, we've had a really interesting weekend, haven't we? And Monday and all that. I am not going to go through the entire NotSoErudite video. I've watched it twice. It's long. It's not fun. It's not good. I'm just going to distill it down to the most essential points and then talk about a short thing, and then we'll dispense with this and get on with Ukraine stuff, honestly. So the principal contention here was that NotSoErudite was misusing the nature of her degrees to misrepresent herself in order to profit from these things, which is true. He came out and said in this short bit, I'm pretty sure this is the right bit, what her degrees are, and we'll talk about that and why it matters, but let's play this clip first.
Here is my CV with my education listed. You'll see that I have a graduate diploma in psychological assessment.
Apparently we're doing a commercial first.
And honors is basically when you combine a major and a so. And since you asked
Here we go.
so politely for my qualifications, let's get into them. Now, in the past, I have avoided getting into everything in high levels of detail. I've spoken in generalities because I don't want malicious actors identifying me. Unfortunately, President Sunday has mostly ripped the band-aid off on that one. There's not much that hasn't been revealed. So I'm going to walk you through what precisely my qualifications are to be speaking on these things. That way any questions or qualms are answered right here. I have a Bachelor of Arts with a major in honor psychology as my undergraduate education. Many people don't know what an honors bachelor distinction part is, the part that communicates good grades. But that's not all. I also have a graduate diploma in psychological assessment. Rather than telling you myself.
Okay. So these are her degrees. Notice what's not there, and this is what's important. What's not there is a master's degree, which is what she's claimed at various times. And what's not there is any kind of certification or license for counseling. And this matters primarily because of this. Yeah, I don't want to watch a freaking Twitch show.
Matters. I never watched Mr. Rogers, so I don't know.
But you said it was Thanksgiving Day, though.
What primarily matters is this. I've started finding people a suitable therapist in the area for a $40 charge. Navigating all the letters, professional designations, and treatment modalities is confusing. Let me help you. Message me on Discord, blah, 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 blah. The service is not up to you. You're entitled to a full refund. The problem here comes down to this. There is no counseling certification. There is no ability for her to be able to legally assess someone's mental health. There's no ability for her to be able to legally assess a therapist or a therapist's modalities. What she does is she goes to the APA's website. That's not right. Hang on. But she goes to this and she goes to the locator, the free locator, and that lets you search for a therapist, and she compares them. You can do this. Appreciate it, Bluestone. You can do this. All by yourself. You do not need someone to do it for you. I promise you, no matter what you're going through, you can do this and find this for yourself. You don't need to pay someone $40. To top off all of this, I took and spoke to a friend of mine who was a social worker and a therapist. And I asked her a couple questions about all this because I wanted to know. I wanted to make sure for my edification that I wasn't totally wrong. The first question I ask is a minor question of ethics. Hypothetically, would it be ethical for someone with no clinical license to charge an individual to search the American Psychological Association database, collecting information such as insurance information, and then recommending treatment options while excluding viable therapists based off of personal bias? The answer to that question, well, that was the second part of the answer. Hang on, this didn't go in order. The answer to that question, no, not ethical. That should be free of charge. Also, that person has no qualifications to make a recommendation. It's that simple. Under the pretext of authority, you just don't get to do that. It would be unethical at any rate at all. And that's why I have a problem with it. And that's why I imagine President Sunday has a problem with it too. On top of using that color of authority to abuse people in debates. Okay. Hi, everybody. Pippa Bluestone, Imran, Harusu, and Cal. I appreciate everybody showing up today. With that, I'm going to get back onto Ukraine because that's what's important. Really, at this point, we have gone too far without talking about this. There's a couple of things I wanted to watch and a couple of things I'm sure will come up later.
Why do armies do
So this one I just want to talk about because it's funny, and we'll get onto it.
Potemkin training? This came up because of a Twitter user named Global Military Info showed a video released by North Korea showing this intense training by the North Korean People's Army. And this isn't
They're very good at killing trees. Very, very good.
some kind of video where I show the video and I do a reaction video and I make fun of the video. If you want that, Nico Ortiz and Jameson Travels are really good channels to check out for that kind of content. Rather, I'd like to talk about why we're seeing this.
Actually, let me point out, Ryan Macbeth here is, if you haven't noticed already, an excellent channel for understanding military matters from a layperson's perspective. He spent, he says, 20 years as an infantryman in the U.S. Army, and he, on top of doing computer programming stuff, if you're interested in it, he talks about misconceptions that come out in media about military. So that's pretty interesting, but this is just amusing.
This kind of training coming from some countries like North Korea and even Russia, and why the US really doesn't make videos like this, although sometimes we do. So to start, dear YouTube manual reviewer, all footage shown in this is training footage and not combat footage. To start, this kind of training is what we call Potemkin training. A Potemkin anything is almost like a facade. The term came from Gregory Potemkin, an 18th century Russian military leader who allegedly created these Potemkin villages, which were these fake Russian villages that were designed to mimic ideal Russian villages complete with happy, well-fed people.
The channel name is Ryan Macbeth, yes.
That way foreign officials could see an idealized version of Russia. And if you want to get technical, Disney's Main Street USA is a Potemkin village. So is this New York movie set in Bulgaria. But a lot of times when you see Russian films, they're doing this Potemkin training. It's these set-piece battles where everything is scripted. What you don't ever see is this. Or this. Or this. This is called Miles Gear, or Multiple Integrated Laser Engagement System. It's basically laser tag with real weapons, and if it sounds familiar, it was featured in a 1986 movie called Heartbreak Ridge with Clint Eastwood. Here's the basic gist of Miles Gear. You have a transmitter that goes on your weapon's barrel. It fires a laser when you shoot a blank round out of your weapon. And then you have a special adapter that goes over your weapon to make sure the weapon cycles properly with the blank round.
Additionally, that discharges the gas that comes out of the blank and keeps it safe to use in close quarters.
A harness on your body and a halo on your head with sensors. There's even sensors for tanks and transmitters for missile launchers. If you are hit by a laser, your harness emits a tone and you take out a casualty card to see if you're dead or wounded or whatever. If you are wounded, your buddies have to treat you and evacuate you. So Miles gear allows for realistic force-on-force training. Troops fire their guns at other troops who are shooting back. Now, Miles lasers can't go through buildings or leaves, and we call that playing the Miles game, but you always have referees called observer coach trainers nearby, and if they see someone doing that, they'll just notionally kill you with the God gun. Now, I have read a lot about Russian forces training, and I have yet to see a single instance where Russia uses any kind of force-on-force laser simulator. You do see some force-on-force training with blanks. You can see this is blank ammunition by the ammunition crimp, and these are blank adapters. But you're getting the benefit of training here, but you can't record hits. The U.S. Army has had Miles since the 1980s, back when we looked like this.
That's some good vintage 80s. So Niles is pretty expensive, and it doesn't necessarily occur all the time. It is only used when necessary. It's not necessarily a horrible thing, especially if you're learning the basics, to just run around with blanks and pretend to shoot one another.
And General Schwarzkopf, the mastermind behind the first Gulf War and Operation Desert Storm, actually credited Miles and the National Training Center where they used this system for the victory over Iraq during Operation Desert Storm. So yeah, you might not see the US military out in the snow doing karate, but our commercials tend to focus and reflect on what we really do, which is usually force-on-force training when we're training. And I would feel pretty darn confident that I could grab just about any soldier in the military, and that soldier could shoot, move, communicate, evaluate a casualty, and evacuate a casualty if they ever had to. So karate in the snow, or actually doing your soldiering job? So why do armies do this kind of training?
Grammar Colony, budget alternatives to Miles, I'm not entirely sure that there's something like that does the same thing. So he explains the system a little bit here. But what happens is the laser designator on the gun doesn't necessarily arm itself until it feels the necessary vibration from a round being fired. So it's an expensive system, and it's calibrated for what it is. So if you put your Miles adapter for a rifle on a tank barrel, for example, the tank barrel isn't going to set off the laser. So they're very specific, and that's kind of where the expense comes in. So it's not just I went to Walmart and picked up a laser tag system type thing. That there is a lot of calibration for equipment that has to happen, and that's kind of where the expense comes in.
Training or release videos like this? Well, it's cheap. You do have to have some kind of training. This will keep your soldiers occupied and in good physical condition. I have no doubt that the soldiers in this Korean video are highly motivated individuals who want to serve their country with honor. But these Potemkin videos really only impress the kind of people who don't know how the military works in the first place. And that being said, I'd like to end this video with the greatest Army recruiting commercial ever made. And thank you so much for watching.
You're reaching deep inside you, go for things you've never known. It's been tough, rough going, but you haven't gone alone.
We do more before 9 a.m. than most people do all day.
Be all that you can.
Hey, First Sergeant. Good morning.
You can do it in the Army.
I think that actual commercial might have made it to the 90s. I kind of distinctly remember it when I was a kid. So the whole point of training videos like that is mostly to impress people with what your military is up to. I don't know if anyone recently has seen the VDV video for the Russian Airborne. It's quite old at this point, and it's been riffed since last February about 1 million times. Mostly because the VDV got utterly wasted in the beginning of the conflict. Well, the beginning of the escalation of the conflict when they try to take Hostomel Airport. I did see a video, which I don't think we can show based on YouTube's rules. That was about showed apparent Russian paratroopers, VDV. They typically wear the orange armbands, the St. George Cross on their arm, in a trench under fire, and doing the whole popping their rifles over the top of the trench without looking thing and firing back. So they've reconstituted the unit since last February. Good for them. But they don't necessarily seem to be up to any kind of quality where they were before. What has been happening and what we're kind of waiting on the edge of our seat for me to bring Hetman in and talk about it, because, again, this is a deeply personal subject for him, and I don't want to overextend his ability to... I don't want to put too much emotional damage into this. I'm kind of waiting for the Russians to kick off an offensive, which we presume is coming in the next couple weeks. It might be coming from the 24th, just as a matter of course. So we'll see what happens. But what has been happening lately is Russian units are attacking in a very wide area. They seem to be looking for weak points. Hang on, we got to get to the ads here. Oh, that's refreshingly little. They seem to be looking for weak points. They're attacking around here. And here. And go away. Yes, you're an adorable child. Go away. I mean, it's continuing attacking around Bakhmut. Ukrainian military repelled Russian attacks near, I can't even begin to pronounce that. Neska, Krema. Yes, I needed some kind of pronunciation guide, but you get the idea. And they actually, because they show attacks all along the line, and they show artillery strikes all along the line. They're looking for where they can attack. They're trying to find a place to get through. I'm going to go with this next, too.
We finally have confirmation that the Russians are using modern projectiles for their tanks, specifically their most modern APF-SDS projectiles. Several months ago, I made a video about how Russians have only been seen using old Soviet-era APF-SDS projectiles, mostly 3BM42 Mango. But it appears that they have actually decided to deploy their latest 3BM60 APF-SDS ammunition. A picture was posted by the Russian unit, where some soldiers took pictures of the projectile, even taking pictures of it next to the already mentioned 3BM.
I have to look. I'm not sure they can fit those rounds on the autoloader. Yeah, I only got 3 crew, so they have an autoloader. I think they're taking pictures of the round just to try to scare people or impress Russians.
42, most likely for comparison, where we can see that the 3BM60 is clearly longer. And yeah, I know it says BM66 on it, but that is the assembly. The designation of the projectile is 3BM60. It is possible that Russia decided to start using these modern projectiles because of the new NATO tanks, like Leopard 2, soon coming to Ukraine. But the Russians said that the projectiles were deployed.
Well, the autoloader doesn't necessarily cause massive losses in and of itself. What happens is if you penetrate the compartment just underneath the tank, here, and all these rounds are arranged in a concentric ring and they're loaded up into the gun. if you penetrate that compartment and it sets off the rounds, the turret pops off, which, yes, will kill the crew. It's not a terrible system. You'd have a lot of problems if you, for instance, if you penetrated that compartment in a Abrams or a Leopard 2 too. You probably wouldn't explode outright, but somebody's hurt at that point, and you've got a casualty to deal with, and you've only got 4 crew members, and you need all of them to operate. The autoloader makes the tank cheaper to operate. You have less soldiers. It has a smaller logistical footprint. The T-90s, T-80s, and T-62s are all smaller to begin with. They're kind of intended to be shipped from a Russian factory into Europe. So it kind of makes a little bit of sense. They have higher losses because they're not using infantry properly.
Deployed before, and that we just didn't see them. I'm not really sure if I believe that, since, as I said in my previous video, there was no actual reason to deploy such ammunition, since 3BM42 was more than good enough to deal with Ukrainian tanks. But maybe they decided to deploy them in small amounts after so many of their tanks got captured by Ukrainians. Who knows? Whatever it is, now we know they are there. The question is only in what amount exactly. It is possible that Russia started ramping up the production of such projectiles since the start of the war, since they have noticeably increased the production of T-90M tanks in this period. But we can't know for sure. These projectiles will undoubtedly have much higher chances of helping the Russians deal with the NATO tanks. Now, how effective they actually are against them, we can't know. It also largely depends on the tank. There is no doubt in my mind that these projectiles can reliably penetrate the old Leopard 2A4 tanks coming from Poland, because of their old armor package from the early 80s. But about the rest, like the German Leopard 2A6, I can't say anything. The turret of that tank is especially a very hard nut to crack. It isn't clear though what tanks actually received these projectiles. I've seen people saying it could be for the T-90M tanks, which is likely, but tanks like T-72B3 and T-80BVM can also fire this projectile without any problems. It is just that the old unmodified tanks like the T-72B that can't. Also, we do have the data for this projectile from an exhibition, but it is only the data for 60 degrees at 2 kilometers on a rolled homogeneous steel. This doesn't really mean much, since rolled homogeneous steel penetration does not equal the same performance on composite armor, since modern armors differ drastically. It also doesn't help that Russia and NATO don't have the same standards when it comes to these kinds of tests. So again, we can't know its exact performance against modern tank armors. All we know is that it is better than 3BM42. That would be all. You can consider supporting me on Patreon. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Have a nice day.
Yeah, that's fair too, Grammar Kami. What I have seen from what I've read so far is that, especially early on when Russia first crosses into Ukraine in last February, Ukraine is using a lot more artillery shells and artillery barrages to take out tanks than anything else. The thing about artillery is it's much longer range, and so that's why everyone who's commenting on it keeps harping on everyone to send more Ukraine more artillery shells. Let's do another infographic show one too, because they did this the other day. In Hungary, there was a height limit of who could be conscripted into the tank crew. Was that the T-34? I know the T-34 was cramped.
What shape is Russia's military really in? The reports from both Russian and Western sources aren't painting a good picture. Russia's casualties have been staggering. Casualty reports are typically kept highly confidential during the height of fighting, and both Russia and Ukraine have kept their casualty figures classified. For both nations, it's a matter of morale, but for Russia, it's even more critical to hide the truth about the real cost of its special military operation from both its military and its people. Most estimates place Russian casualties at around 100,000, with 25% of those being killed in action. Recently, the EU estimated that Ukraine itself had suffered 100,000 casualties, and its estimate is believed to have been based on some level of intelligence gathering. Ukraine was quick to protest, and the EU quickly redacted its report. However, if there's any truth to it, then there is no conceivable way that Russian casualties aren't significantly higher than this. For most of the war, Ukraine was on the defensive. Simple battlefield arithmetic states that between peer adversaries, the side on the offense is going to take on more casualties than that on defense. So if Ukraine has suffered 100,000 casualties, Russia is likely to have taken anywhere from 50% to 100% more by the simple nature of war. Further exaggerating Russian casualty figures, though, are non-combat injuries and deaths. Ukrainian forces started out the war relatively poorly armed and equipped, with only some Ukrainians being properly equipped. However, after a massive rallying effort by the West, the average Ukrainian unit is better equipped than its Russian counterpart, and it's not just weapons we're talking about. Famously, Russian units assaulting Kyiv complained about a lack of food and water. Russian invaders were seen looting food and drinking water from stores, and when Ukrainian units defeated Russian forces or forced them to retreat, they often discovered inadequate and expired rations. To an outside observer, that should raise some red flags, considering that there's plenty of websites selling authentic Russian military rations online. As usual, deeply rooted corruption is to blame, but food and water haven't been the only casualties of bad Russian logistics. With winter setting in, both sides require winter gear in large quantities. The West was anticipating this need and was able to fully supply Ukraine with all the winter kit its troops would need. When Russia went to ship winter gear down to its own troops, it discovered in early October that as much as 1.5 million winter uniforms had been misplaced. State Duma Deputy Andrei Gurilev was quoted as saying, "It's still unclear to me where 1.5 million sets of uniforms that were stored at the points of reception of personnel have gone. Today we have problems with the form."
The problem I have with infographics show is that they haven't really talked about the state of the Ukrainian military much, because like we did the Willie OAM thing a week or so ago. Oh, geez, streaming is a long job. Anyway, we did the Willie OAM thing a week or so ago, and talked about a rather sad state for a lot of Ukraine's units too. So, like, Russia might be in rough shape, but then again, so would be Ukraine. So could Ukraine.
And then with something else. It was all there. Where did it disappear to? No one anywhere can explain this in any way. Gurilev, however, should have not been as surprised as he appeared to be, given that corruption in the Russian army is rampant and stealing supplies is basically a tradition. During the wars in Chechnya, Russian soldiers would strip their own vehicles of valuable wiring and sell it in local markets. They'd even steal large amounts of ammunition, grenades, and even RPGs to sell them at the local markets, even though most of that equipment would end up being used against their comrades. Any missing gear would simply be chalked up to clerical errors or destroyed in combat, with army personnel fully in or intimidated into the grift. There is some concern that Russian soldiers are not properly equipped or fed for wintertime conditions. One video making the rounds from a Ukrainian drone shows strong evidence of what might be hypothermia amongst Russian troops. In the video, the Ukrainian drone drops a grenade into a mass of sleeping Russian soldiers who are huddled together for warmth. When the grenade explodes, though, only one of the soldiers attempts to get up out of the hole, with the rest barely showing any signs of life. Many observers have pointed out the poor quality of winter gear the soldiers are wearing in the video, and that it would take something extreme like hypothermia to simply not react to a grenade exploding literally right next to you. As winter intensifies, a lack of protective equipment is going to take an even greater toll on Russian soldiers, especially as Vladimir Putin and his generals plan a major offensive to try to knock Ukraine off its heels. Russian equipment isn't faring much better, though. Shortly after the start of the war, it became clear that Russian incompetence and corruption had taken a serious toll on its equipment stockpiles. Vehicles were famously abandoned on the side of the road because of one fatal flaw: their tires. Many
Yeah, even armies that have a lot of supplies experience theft. Like I talked previously about the problem that American military units have with missing munitions. Quite famously, someone, uh, many people, myself included, used to grab extra bits of cereal on the little pull-up containers in the morning when we were on field training exercises as cadets, and we'd stick them right in our cargo pockets on the uniform, so we had extra food throughout the day.
The captured vehicles displayed clear sign of tire rot, which is caused by the rubber weakening when exposed to the sun. In order to avoid this, vehicle maintainers rotate vehicles regularly so that one side of the vehicle isn't always facing the sun. But low-quality Chinese-made tires also took their toll on Russian vehicles, with one particularly famous incident of a multi-million-dollar air defense vehicle abandoned because its tires went bad. Turns out many Russian vehicles were using cheap Chinese tires that were not rated for the vehicles they were installed on. And unlike Western manufacturers, their tires were not X-rayed and analyzed for structural defects that would...
I really wish they would provide sources here. Like, I know that the tires that Russia was using had sun rot. I don't know about Chinese tires. Like, I had not heard that. I really wish there were sources involved here.
Jeopardize their performance. This isn't a case of the Chinese just making bad tires, though, as they manufacture perfectly good tires for their own military vehicles, but rather a clear case of Major Korruptovich simply pocketing the difference between purchasing the intended high-quality tires and the cheap ones. Russia's...
I can't tell if that's racist or not. It's slightly racist.
Once feared tank force have also fared extremely poorly in Ukraine. Russia's tank losses are estimated at around 1,500, an absolutely apocalyptic rate of tank loss for any modern force. Current estimates predict that if sanctions were lifted tomorrow, it would take Russia as much as 10 years to fully rebuild its armored forces, while it would take much less time to field less capable but much lighter forces.
So that's kind of a misleading statistic, I think, a little bit. Russia has a lot of tanks, a whole lot of tanks. I don't even think they... I can't spell today. No, go away. Russia has a lot of tanks. These numbers are probably way inflated, honestly. They're going largely off of the report. And these numbers are also probably inflated as well. That number might be accurate. Troop losses. 3,290 tanks. That's a lot of tanks. It's certainly a long time to rebuild, but you're looking at a massive stockpile. And even if we assume that this number is half of that, 4,000 tanks is still quite a lot. That's 3,000 tanks in a year. A lot of damage can be done in a whole nother year of fighting.
It's important to remember when talking Russian reconstitution that the nation is still the world's second largest arms exporter and has great industrial capability to rebuild. But that itself is contingent on many factors. Not least of all is the fact that sanctions have taken a deep bite out of the Russian economy, with the economy fallout only set to worsen over time. Russia's GDP is expected to shrink by 3% this year alone, and its inflation rate could hit 14% or higher again next year. Even more troubling, the EU has imposed a ban on most Russian energy exports and capped the price of Russian oil at $60 a barrel. While the rest of the world is not beholden to this cap, many who are closely aligned with the West are expected to abide by it. Even more importantly, though, anybody who imports Russian oil via Western infrastructure or on ships insured by Western firms is legally beholden to the price cap. The move is going to take a serious bite out of Russia's finances, whose economy is disproportionately dependent on the energy sector, with as much as 60% of the government's revenues coming from the sale of energy exports. Further, sanctions on technological goods needed for modern weapons makes reconstitution of forces a more difficult and much lengthier affair. The problem with Russian armor, though, isn't limited to the difficulties in replacing them. Russian tanks have proven to be fundamentally flawed when facing modern threats. Today's anti-tank missiles typically...
In fairness, I don't think if you shot a Javelin at a Leopard or a Abrams, the Abrams or Leopard would fare nearly as well as people think.
attack in top attack mode, meaning they pop up into the sky when fired and come down directly on top of the tank's thinner turret roof armor. This is a significant problem for Russian tanks, as their autoloaders use a carousel mechanism to store the ammunition that rings the turret, meaning a direct hit that penetrates the armor will explode all of the ammunition, instantly disintegrating the crew and sending the turret flying. This may not be as big of a problem when facing enemy tanks, but with the propagation of modern ATGMs in today's battlefield, it has made Russian tanks death traps for their crews. Ironically, a Russian tank today may be safer facing off against a peer tank than light infantry, precisely because of the ATGM threats. Russia's issues with tanks also highlights another major problem with Russia's military, which has yet to be addressed. Long believed to be a capable modern combined arms army, Russia has proven that it is in fact incapable of fighting using modern doctrine. At the start of the war, Russian tanks
Yes, clearly they just shrug it off. Psych. That's largely appeared to be true, that Russia is not properly employing doctrine. I honestly, I get why it's happening now at such a high force turnover from before. I don't get why it would have happened at the outset of the conflict, which is a theoretically well-trained army. Part of me really would like to see what Russian commanders think, assuming any of them actually survived this, happened between Ukraine and what Putin will probably do to them when they fail. We'll see.
Tanks operated unsupported by friendly infantry, which left them extremely vulnerable to hunter-killer anti-tank teams. Since then, things haven't improved very much, and the influx of 300,000 poorly trained conscripts isn't going to make Russian doctrine change anytime soon. Russia pretended to be a combined arms army, but today the illusion is shattered and Russia can no longer keep up the facade. This means that ironically, Russia's forces are faring better today than they were 6 months ago. Playing to its true strengths, Russia has reverted back to its old doctrine of using artillery.
It's not a question of forgetting doctrine, Bluestone. It's a question of what that doctrine is in the first place and whether they're trained in it. It's much easier to sit in defensive position and shoot at people who come up to you. It's a lot harder to organize attacks, because attacks don't happen like at small unit levels. They happen not in squads or fire teams. They happen in companies. So you've got a whole bunch of moving parts that the officers have to know how to coordinate, the NCOs have to know how to coordinate, the soldiers have to know their parts in that task, and that's a lot of training. So what the United States military does, like when we talked about the Potemkin training earlier, is they do the same tasks, the same fundamental tasks over and over and over and over again. Oh, they changed it. Anyway. This might be the Marines version of it, or it might be the Army's. Hang on. Yeah, this is the right one. It's just an old copy. They do the same tasks over and over again, and it's basically this book here. It was called 7-8 some time ago. It got changed to 3-something. So you just go through each set of tasks, and let me find it. Battle drills 4-1. $3.15. Oh, so you gotta love these old style animations in Army manuals. Too far. Here we go. Battle drill 1A. Perfect. He practiced these. Squad is moving as part of a platoon, conducting a movement to counter hasty or deliberate attack. That'll make a lot more sense when we do the basic military science videos. But they practice these things over and over again, so they know what they're doing when the time comes.
Artillery to blast an opponent into submission, and here Russia has held a significant advantage during most of the war. Ukrainian estimates have placed Russia's advantage in artillery as high as 20-1 when the fighting started, with many soldiers reporting that for every one shell they fired at the Russians, they responded with dozens back. But that ratio seems to have equalized. Today, Russia is engaged in fierce fighting around the small town of Bakhmut in the east. The fighting around the town has become the source of most of our insights into the current state of Russia's capabilities. Here, the Wagner private military company is leading the charge and is largely responsible for the difficulties Ukraine has had in defeating Russia's attempted offensive. Better trained and equipped than their regular military counterparts, Wagner mercenaries have performed a great deal better than the Russian military, and Russia has been happy to lean heavily on them in an attempt to take Bakhmut from the Ukrainians. Despite this, though, reports from the
I don't know how much that's true. I think the Russians, or more specifically, Shoigu, is working to sideline.
Russian military bloggers themselves indicate that Russia's artillery advantage is rapidly eroding. It's not that they're running out of guns, though certainly their artillery forces have suffered greatly with the introduction of American M777s, Excalibur precision rounds, and HIMARS. Rather, Russia is running out of ammunition. Both sides are expending thousands of shells a day, but Russia has suffered catastrophic losses in equipment thanks to Western intelligence and precision HIMARS strikes against its ammunition depots. When the weapon system was introduced into the theater in mid-summer, the Ukrainians scored some very high-profile victories by destroying massive ammo dumps used by the Russians that were situated well behind the front lines. Out of range of conventional artillery, HIMARS' range of up to 40 kilometers puts these ammo dumps at risk. Now Russia has learned from its mistake and split its supplies up into smaller, more widely dispersed dumps. This has slowed but not stopped Ukraine's use of HIMARS to destroy them, though. Try as they might, Russia cannot hide its logistics from the vast intelligence-gathering apparatus of the United States and its allies. The loss of hundreds of thousands of shells has directly impacted Russia's ability to use overwhelming firepower to crush Ukrainian forces, and the more widely dispersed nature of Russia's current smaller ammo dumps has slowed down the rate of resupply and thus fire missions. When you factor in modern counter-battery radars provided by the West, Russia's vaunted artillery forces are having extreme difficulties retaining their advantage on the battlefield and providing the badly needed support Russia's forces need. The Russian Air Force.
So that's one of those things that people don't necessarily take into account today. A lot of people's concept of warfare comes from World War II, before counter-battery radar. So if you have an artillery position, what you have to do is fire and then move the position, because if you stay there, they're going to track the shell on radar and trace it back to your position and blow you up. So self-propelled guns, for instance, like we've given Ukraine a couple, I know, self-propelled guns that let you just shoot and drive off, very useful, but you can position your artillery in such a way too that you can easily withdraw it from an area so it does not get blown up.
Force and Navy both have performed abysmally during the war, with the Navy specifically performing so poorly that its ships are in effect forced to remain close to friendly harbors for fear of being sunk. Famously, Russia's Black Sea flagship, the Moskva, was sunk by 2 anti-ship missiles, with evidence pointing to the fact that part of its air defense system was either not turned on or not fully operational. The use of drones against Russia's Navy has also been devastating, and Russia has shown that its naval operations doctrine is even worse than its ability to wage combined arms warfare. Russia's aerospace...
In fairness to the Russian Navy, no one knows why they really exist. Russia spent an enormous amount of money on really big warships, that most of which are out of service right now. Most of which are out of service right now, and I don't know why. Like, Russia has a land access to most of Europe, theoretically, and most of Asia. And the Navy, the surface Navy anyway, was just built to support the army. So big ships don't make a lot of sense. Destroyers and frigates and corvettes make a lot of sense. but not big ships, not cruisers and aircraft carriers.
Space forces, though, have been famously missing from the fight in Ukraine, with many wondering why that is. Despite having the world's second largest air force, Russia has been unable to establish air superiority over Ukraine, let alone air dominance. This is largely in part due to the fundamentally flawed nature of Russian air doctrine. Expecting to go to war against superior Western air forces, Russian air forces are designed to gain air superiority over limited parts of the front at once, and to operate with the direct support of ground-based air defenses. This means Russia has two glaring deficiencies. First, if divorced from ground air defenses, Russia's fighters cannot guarantee security for Russian attack aircraft or for the ground forces they're meant to protect from an enemy attack. This is not as big a deal in Ukraine, as Ukraine's own air force is roughly on technological parity with Russia's. However, against
Russia's air force probably is ahead. What they have is a lot of airframes that are modified versions of fairly famous Russian fighters, like the MiG-29 and Su-27. So you have like the Su-33, MiG-31, etc., etc., etc.
NATO's superior aircraft and avionics, unsupported Russian fighters are at serious risk. The second deficiency in Russia's air forces, though, is the inability to conduct deep strike operations. While Russia is certainly capable of launching long-range attack munitions from deep behind friendly lines, it's almost wholly incapable of penetrating even Ukraine's air defenses to strike at targets in the enemy's rear areas.
So Russia has a very large fleet of bombers, usually made by the company Tupolev, like the Backfire and Bear, and a whole bunch of them. And the bombers were essentially designed to counter American carriers. So they go up and you launch a squadron or two of bombers, and they all carry cruise missiles, and they fire all the cruise missiles at carriers, and they go back home. And so, like, to counter that, we built things like the F-14 with very long-range abilities to intercept bombers before they get close enough to fire missiles, etc., etc., etc. So the Russians are using those bombers to strike targets, but they're not necessarily precision strikes. What we're talking about here is flying a smaller attack fighter like a MiG-29, for instance, into an area and dropping a bomb on a target that the pilot has verified in kind of a close air support fashion or kind of a very direct fashion. That they probably are having a very hard time doing because of Ukrainian air defenses. However, I don't think Ukraine has the air defense capacity to actually stop those bombers from those larger bombers from being able to drop cruise missiles on them.
This means that Russia is incapable of rapidly responding to threats as they appear and capitalizing on targets of opportunity the way the U.S. Air Force is able to. One reason for this is that Russia does not operate dedicated suppression of enemy air defense aircraft. In the U.S., Wild Weasel aircraft and pilots are specially modified and trained to hunt down enemy air defenses and wipe them out with specialized weapons. Russia does not have a similar capability, leaving SEAD missions in the hands of average pilots who must complete a very lethal mission without the right training and tools. This is again by design, as Russia never expected to use its air forces in deep strike roles against NATO forces. Secondly, Russia lacks the ability to rapidly conduct target damage assessments, a critical requirement for modern air forces. The ability to rapidly assess how effective a strike mission was allows for quick follow-on attacks to finish the job while the target is vulnerable, or to avoid wasteful expenditure of additional munitions. Ukrainian sources estimate that Russia can take as much as 2 days to conduct a damage assessment on a target, and has launched repeated volleys on destroyed targets on multiple occasions. Russia's air force has in effect been reduced to airborne artillery, lobbing long-range munitions from behind front lines. Ukraine is too...
That we know is true from the report about a month or two back that came out about the Russian Air Force and the need for more air defense systems to take care of loitering munitions.
Incapable of bringing its air force to bear on frontline targets due to Russian air defenses, which is why the war has been defined by World War I trench combat. Today, Russian forces seem to have slowed Ukraine's counteroffensive down to a mere crawl. The
problem I have with that statement is that Ukraine is also sitting in the trenches, so they lack the ability to get out. They're lacking the ability to break out, and I'm not entirely certain what would give them that ability. Probably more artillery, more tanks, more infantry fighting vehicles, but there are other problems. I'll finish this. Hang on.
Flux of 300,000 conscripts combined with winter weather, making the terrain too muddy to drive on, and a necessary operational pause for Ukraine to regroup and rest its forces have given Russia some breathing room. But Russia has been forced to send these conscripts to combat poorly trained and unprepared, as opposed to the 6 months or so of training that Ukraine's
You gotta be kidding me. These graphics are just ridiculous.
own conscripts drafted at the start of the war have completed under the supervision of Western training staff. To make matters even worse, Russia has sent much of its own training staff to the front. This means that what conscripts do get training are getting it from inexperienced trainers. Poorly trained conscripts are not good for offensives, meaning that Russia will likely be able to present significant challenges to Ukraine's continued offensive, but be incapable of carrying out any of its own. It'll have to rely on regular army units to do that, and that means pulling them from the front to allow for reconstitution of forces and to give them a badly needed rest. With a second draft expected in January and strong indications that Russia will attempt another major offensive around that same time, the next few months will likely decide the fate of the war. But one thing is for sure, as it stands, Ukrainian armed forces are in far better shape to continue the fight than Russia's own. Now, cure your boredom with the huge problem.
Yeah, trench warfare is not necessarily dead, it's situational. However, the degree to which you can engage in trench warfare really depends on how much space you have. So let's go back to that map real quick. So this map's kind of helpful in a lot. I do detest how many ads there are, but this map's kind of helpful in a lot of ways. Let's just take a look down here, for instance. This is Kherson, and you see there's a river that runs all the way out to the Black Sea here. Or more accurately, I don't know. Anyway. The blue areas are areas that Ukraine took back after Russia retreated past them. Russia retreated past onto the river. This is a very difficult river to cross famously, like basically becomes a lake here anyway, in Zaporizhia. This is very difficult to cross river anyway. So the river works now to Russia's advantage, because you go back earlier in the war, back over here, and Ukraine was just absolutely popping off and destroying huge Russian units. Oh, we're all now reporting balloons, hooray. Anyway, Russia was getting huge units destroyed earlier in the war trying to cross the river. So this is all basically dead front until the Ukrainians can force a crossing. So this doesn't count anymore. It shortens the Russian lines considerably. They can concentrate more defenses here. This doesn't count because this is even wider and harder to cross. So Russia can easily concentrate forces all along this area and all along here and just start hammering it. Are we back? Is the stream back?
Знаєте, є таке прислів'я, лучше пізніше, чим ніколи. Я тільки можу сказати, що мені, як танкісту, бракує оцієї техніки. І тому вивчати даний танк їм... Всі мої солдати, також і я особисто, ми приїхали з Східного фронту. Донецьк-Луганськ. Мої солдати мають бойовий досвід. Вони не прийшли з вулиці. Вони деякий час воюють уже на танках на наших. І тому вивчати даний танк їм вже набагато легше.
So yeah, I was really afraid of this, as they're going to try to rush these units with Leopards into service. I don't think that's a good idea. I really hope that they are cross-training commanders as well.
Mają duże pojęcie o czołgach, zadają dużo pytań i na dzień dzisiejszy widzimy, że są zachwyceni rozwiązaniami konstrukcyjnymi czołgu Leopard.
Look at that there beret. Never mind, we'll move on. I'm sure that's perfectly acceptable in Poland. Yeah, I'm gonna have to ask Lucy about that. Here's the thing about berets. Berets are kind of a pain. They're very much a pride symbol, but they're kind of a pain to put together. So in order to wear a beret, it has to be shaped to your head. And you have basically a front patch up here that goes over your eye, and then you comb it over. And the way you get it to stay is twofold. First, you have to get it wet for an extended period of time and conform it to your head. So when you get a new beret, what most American soldiers had to do, because they don't use the beret much anymore, is they had to shower with it to make it conform to the uniform standard and be worn properly. So a beret is kind of a terrible bit of headgear because you can only have one single person wear it properly. Which makes them expensive, which is not a problem if you have your own uniform budget like American soldiers do, but otherwise than that. The second point is that you have to, it gets fuzzy, so you have to shave it. I've never seen this channel before today, so we're checking this out. I like how they don't have narrators, so they can't actually say things on screen. I can't afford graphics, and they can afford narrators.
Game changers.
Our lead story tonight is from Ukraine. The war is intensifying, Russia is going all guns blazing, and Ukraine is losing ground. American intel says Russia is launching a big offensive, and they're throwing everything into it: soldiers, tanks, even fighter jets. The focus is on eastern Ukraine. The fighting has intensified in Bakhmut. It's a small Ukrainian city ravaged by the war. It is at the center of a fierce battle now. Russia wants to capture Bakhmut. Yesterday, Ukraine's forces, in fact, blew up a bridge there.
You take that back. Berets are wonderful. I had to make 2 work on my head. Actually, they're horrible. They're hot and sticky, and I like patrol caps better, but that's beside the point.
Trying to stop the Russian advance.
According to my friends who serve in Bakhmut, the situation is such that Russian troops can advance for one day. Then Ukrainian soldiers knock them out of these positions. There is no such thing as the enemy being able to gain a hold and dig in new positions. Our soldiers do not allow them to gain a hold in Bakhmut.
That was a Ukrainian soldier on the front lines. Both militaries have been fighting here since May last year. They've suffered heavy casualties. Now Russia is making a fresh but more aggressive push. But why Bakhmut? Why does Russia want to capture this small city of all places? Experts have a theory. Bakhmut could be a stepping stone. Once it is captured, Russia could make a bigger push in the east, one that targets Donetsk and Luhansk. Together, these 2 regions make up the Donbass. This is the main battlefield of the war. Last year, Russia declared that it had captured Donbass. Moscow staked a claim on 4 regions: Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson. The announcement was made by Vladimir Putin himself. In 2014, he had taken Crimea from Ukraine. But this time it was different. Even though Russia claimed these territories, it wasn't really in control of them. Russian troops were present and in charge.
I'm not entirely certain that Bakhmut is terribly important. Ukraine will just fall back and defend other positions. It's a question of, are they bleeding Russians more than Russians are bleeding Ukrainians? And I also don't necessarily think that Ukrainian soldiers are. I don't think wars of attrition are really what's going to work. Ukraine needs big moves. They need to fall back, eat up a period of time, and then encircle Russian forces and capture them or take them out. They don't need to be sitting there with the Russians banging their head against the wall, because that wall is made up of Ukrainian people. So I'm not entirely certain the holding action is. I understand why it's happening. It's happening because Ukraine feels compelled to show the West that all these weapons and equipment are doing good and that they're letting them hold territory or take it back. However, it's not great insofar as I'd rather be the one who gets to pick where the fighting happens. I also understand that they don't want to give up ground because civilians who get trapped behind it could be murdered very regularly. I understand all of these facts. I'm just not sure they're sufficient to win a victory without huge cost.
In just a few areas. Towards the end of 2022, Russia controlled just 18% of Ukraine. And Kiev kept pushing back on the battlefield. But today, the Ukrainian forces are struggling. Zelensky himself admits this is a tough situation.
And of course, today, as every day, I was in touch with our military, our commanders. I had a few meetings. The situation on the front line, especially in Donetsk and Luhansk regions, remains very difficult. The battles are literally for every foot of Ukrainian land.
Despite support from the West, Ukraine is struggling and the NATO is worried. NATO Chief Stoltenberg says Ukraine is using up its ammunition quickly and the demand is high. The West may find it difficult, in fact, to keep up the supply. I have some numbers. Russia has been firing 20,000 artillery shells a day. 20,000 every day. What about Ukraine? 6,000 to 7,000 shells. This is the average. And it's high. Ukraine may run out of supplies. Its main ally, the US, is already making appeals.
Ukraine has urgent requirements to help it meet this crucial moment in the course of the war. And President Zelensky underscored Ukraine's need for more equipment at our last meeting in Ramstein.
Ukraine has urgent requirements, says Lloyd Austin. Stoltenberg says Western defense industries are under strain. This is a war of attrition. It is now all about bigger guns and more ammunition. And there's no end to Ukraine's demands. First the tanks, then fighter jets, now ammunition. The list continues to grow. Moscow is sending reinforcements too. Reports say Russia is amassing aircraft close to the Ukraine border. These are fixed-wing and rotary aircraft, basically fighter jets and choppers. They've been moved close to Ukraine's borders. Will Russia deploy its air...
I always enjoy when newscasters are not necessarily equipped to talk on an issue. Yes, that's not how you pronounce it, Rammstein. Are not necessarily equipped to talk on an issue. These are basically fighter jets. No, they are fighter jets and helicopters. That's just a more technical term for them.
Air power soon. Is an air attack now imminent? It's hard to say, but Russia seems to be preparing for one, and it's getting support from Belarus. Let me show you some pictures. These are Belarusian troops. They're training in Brest. It's a border city in Belarus. This training ground is just 4 kilometers away from Poland and about 50 kilometers from Ukraine. These troops are preparing for combat. They're practicing driving, parachuting, and combat scenes. But why are Belarusian troops getting combat ready? Do they plan to enter Ukraine? President Alexander Lukashenko is an ally of the Kremlin. He's made major concessions to Russia in the past. His country has been used by Russia.
They've been saying this for months. Now, if I remember correctly, Belarus does not have a very large army. Yeah, reserve personnel is kind of a nebulous number. Let's go with 62,000 right now that they could do today. Belarus is Russia's frontier. They need to keep a sufficient force in place just in case NATO attacks, just as readily as Ukraine has to keep sufficient forces on their northern border in case Russia or Belarus attacks through Belarus. The other problem that Belarus has is Lushenko is incredibly unpopular. So if all the soldiers just start leaving, or if they start calling up draftees or conscripts, they might very easily have their own revolution on their hands. Which makes it very disadvantageous for Lushenko in any event, because he has to A, protect against NATO, and B, protect against his own population. Makes it very disadvantageous for him to join the war. This does not necessarily mean he won't, but if we assume that state actors are logical, pushes the probability in a certain direction. However, Putin and Lushenko might not necessarily be logical.
Troops as a launch pad. Is Lukashenko preparing for the next step? Will he be sending his troops into Ukraine? The soldiers say they're ready.
Soldat, we are ready for any task, however difficult, if we have to defend our beloved Belarus. We will not give our beloved away. It is ours, our beloved, our only one.
Either way, the battle in Ukraine will intensify. What is the thinking in Moscow then? It sees NATO's growing involvement.
Serves better logically as an outsourced plan to clear up that tanks. Yeah, they're probably a bunch of better equipment storage than they are, and missile launch pad than they are anything else.
First of all, NATO is an organization that is hostile to us, and that proves this hostility every day. It is trying its best to make its involvement in the conflict around Ukraine as clear as possible. That's the first thing. Of course, this demands certain precautionary steps to be taken.
And it's
If NATO was really trying to make its involvement known, don't you think they'd send in troops?
not just the battle on the ground, the information war between Russia and the West is also intensifying. Here's the latest against Russia. A Yale University study. This study makes some disturbing claims. It says Russia is running a re-education camp for Ukrainian children. At least 6,000 children are said to be in these camps. The study says they're from Russian-occupied regions in Ukraine, like Donbass and Crimea. And what's the purpose of these camps? Political re-education, according to the study. The children are...
Bluestone, that answer is kind of... that answer comes in two parts, because it doesn't just involve Ukraine. It also involves the Kaliningrad enclave and worries about attacks from there. So the entire thing, if NATO actually did get involved, would probably involve a fairly significant air campaign to start. And that would take some time. This is more akin to a conventional war like Desert Storm in that scenario than it is to a situation like Afghanistan or Iraq too. I don't necessarily think it would be that fast. Like, I think it would take some time. Iraq, for instance, had a large number of tanks, but a lot of those tanks are not modern at that point in time. So it's not, I don't think it would be quick, and it would take a certain amount of time. It would just sort of be an inevitable situation at that point. You'd also, have, for example, have to get the bulk of NATO's muscle is American forces. The entire point of NATO is that Europe holds the line till America gets there and pushes Russia back. And that's more of a modern idea than it was in the Cold War, because technology has shifted dramatically in the West's favor.
Are apparently being trained in Russian values. The US says these children were separated from their families.
In many cases, Russia purported to temporarily evacuate children in Ukraine under the guise of a free summer camp, only to later refuse to return the children and to cut off all contact with their families. Such actions obviously will have serious long-term implications on these children's development. The network of facilities which these children are sent is vast, spanning from Russia-occupied Crimea, across
No
Russia
problem.
itself, from the Black Sea region to its Far East.
Russia has challenged these claims. The Russian embassy in Washington, D.C. released a statement. It says these kids are orphans. I have that statement with me, and this is what it says. We do our best to keep underage people in families, and in cases of absence or deaths of parents and relatives, to transfer orphans under guardianship. We've not been able to verify.
Why are there orphans in Russia then and not Ukraine? Also, they wouldn't be orphans if the Russians weren't there.
Either version, but we can say for sure that these children are collateral damage, and in the days and weeks ahead, there will be more like them. The fighting is intensifying as the war comes close to its first anniversary. There's a serious risk of this conflict spilling over.
All right, I got one more for the day.
Russian soldiers have been seen digging miles.
Not that one. We'll be reconvening probably tomorrow. I saved my video. Where is it? Fire the producer. It's me. Fire the producer. Hey, Titan. Thanks for showing up.
Hello, my friends. It seems like the big Russian attack starts to fail. Almost every day we go to the footages of the new explosions of the Russian columns. For example, this one happened near to Bakhmut. That huge explosion might be caused by the ammunition detonation inside the tank. Plus, there are more and more.
That's a very big explosion. That's not one tank, I don't think. Maybe it could be. It's hard to tell.
More videos coming from the front lines showing the Russian infantry and how they struggle under the fire of Ukrainian artillery and drones. Yeah, this video I definitely cannot publish on YouTube. Still, I wouldn't say that Russia is on their big assault. However, they have some sort of the new vectors. For example, here directly to Kupiansk, they want to retake the city in the Kharkiv region that was liberated by Ukrainian forces a long time ago. They also intensified the fire near to Crimea before Ukraine got the counterattack over there. They obviously got some sort of the small success near to Bakhmut, and they also failed in Vuhledar. Vuhledar is on the south part of the front lines. So Vuhledar no go. As for the Donetsk direction, partially they got some sort of the success, so maybe plus minus for the Russian army. They still cannot penetrate the main defense line that Ukraine was able to build.
I don't know. The logical point to take Bakhmut is to go and take Zaporizhzhia. And that's probably the best way to do it, honestly. But I don't think Russia has enough steam to go from here to here. I don't think they have the organization to go from here to here. So I'm sure they're going to try. They'll probably make some gains, but then summer will roll around and Ukraine will just push them back because they won't have this. They won't have sufficient organization to do the job. They won't. They're going to expend everything that they put together. All the functional units they put together fighting these grinding battles. It's just going to be a year of back and forth unless someone decides to do something to break the stalemate.
And still, based on the information we got and based on the chart, I'll just switch on the Russian positions. They concentrate lots of the forces on the eastern side, so the main assault will be on the eastern side of Ukraine. But still, Russia may attack from other places. By the way, my friends, now I'll tell you about the resource which helps me to get the up-to-date information about the situation in Ukraine. We are now on a ground news website. I found about this year ago. The reality is that it could be true. And here we have the bias distribution. Left part, you can see all of the relations to the media resource rate. If you tend to...
If Ground News wants me to run an ad, they can pay me.
Happy that Russia is not moving to the north and they are to Bakhmut and see the situation over there. Russia claimed that they took the Krasnohora, which is on the northern part from the Bakhmut, so still far away from the city itself. And I'm very happy that Russia is not moving to the north and they are unable to capture Chasiv Yar and Ivanivske, but still they present the great threat to Bakhmut from the eastern side and also from the north direction from the...
So you can kind of see what the Russians are aiming for here, specifically with Bakhmut and the roads in question. They're pushing gradually around the north part of the city and the south part of the city. They're trying to squeeze it shut. And it doesn't look great. So what you have forming here for Ukraine is what's called a salient. And it's exactly like the word sounds. It's a salient in the line where they have a portion of their line that is extended into the Russian line, and the Russians are pushing past it. Salients are kind of tricky because salients provide opportunities to break through and encircle forces. So there are Ukrainian forces, not necessarily in a concrete line in here, but there are Ukrainian forces all along here that if they break through, would get surrounded and trapped by Russians. This also right here is a salient for Russia. So the process of forming salients is something that you want to do on a strategic level because it gives you opportunities, but it also creates vulnerabilities. The idea, though, is that if your attack is sufficiently powerful and it can sustain itself, that it keeps pushing them back and they don't have an opportunity to exploit the salient that you're forming and the chance of trying to form your own salient and close it shut.
South, if they cut supply line, it's better to get out from Bakhmut for Ukrainian forces. And now I contacted my friend who is in Bakhmut and they're moving from this part of the city. I don't know if all of the forces are moving or not, but Russia entered the residential area of the city and now moving to the river. And I guess this month they will try to capture at least the part of the Bakhmut. And in that case, a Russian leader may say that they got some sort of the success after 1 year of the war. And unfortunately, I think that it may continue as soon as Russian president keeps his power in Russia. And time-lapse, you can see that Russia takes some of the ground each day, but definitely they lost quite a lot of forces. According to the British intelligence, they lost around 6,400 people during the last week. And if we scroll back for 1 week, it's like that. So they lost more than 6,000 soldiers to get some of the fields and maybe a couple of the villages over here. So
to be clear, that's an estimate, and it's 6,000 casualties, so that's wounded, killed, missing, all lumped together. And I would imagine that there's quite a lot of missing in that number, too.
So it's total nonsense. About the south, my friends, Vuhledar, Russia recognized their failure, not officially, but some of the media resources in Russia, and they've lost 155th Marine Brigade over there. But at the same time, Putin in his short interview said that they are fighting, they continue to fight. Our Marines from Pacific Fleet, they do the fantastic job. Really, as for Ukraine, they did a fantastic job just eliminating themselves over there. So I'll tell you what happened there. Firstly, Russia took Pavlivka. It was around 2 months ago, and they took it with the help of the Marines, but it happened after they wasted around 500 mobilized soldiers. So they sent them to Pavlivka, they faced with the Ukrainian resistance, they went back, and the Russian forces on the second defense line, they just opened the friendly fire towards the retreating Russian soldiers because they thought that those were Ukrainians who moved back. So Russia lost around 5.
That particular situation of friendly fire, because there's, and it'll become less so as more NATO equipment gets introduced, but because they're so similar in equipment, it can be very difficult to figure out who is who. Which is why I was flabbergasted when I heard reports, especially at the beginning of the invasion, that no one told the Russian troops who were entering Ukraine what was going on.
500 soldiers over there in their failed attempt, and in their successful attempt they lost around 300 soldiers, so totally 800 just for Pavlivka. And for Vuhledar, it's been counted around 700 soldiers that they lost in unsuccessful attempts to get it under control. Why is it happening like that? Because Ukraine got strong defense lines over there, and also we were able to mine all of the fields around, and those are the open fields. Russia cannot jump over them. That is why they have to go on the straight attacks, and they cannot use the aviation over there as well, because Ukraine put the
minefields are going to be a problem when this war ends.
Air defense systems very close to Vuhledar. Ukrainian forces shot down many of the Russian attack helicopters and attack airplanes in that area, and for Russia, Vuhledar is kind of the big pain in the ass, because Vuhledar may be used to attack the railway line that goes not far away, and Russia needs that railway to send supplies from Crimea.
I'm not entirely like the legend of Russians using machine gun, or Soviets using machine guns rather, in World War II to keep units moving forward and shooting retreaters or deserters is fraught in historical sources. It's very difficult to pin that down as yes, we're absolutely positive that happened. That it's happening today might also be the case, but a lot of what I have been, I'm very wary because of how much information doesn't come out of Russia in saying, yes, I know this is happening for sure. Because you're getting conscripts to fire on conscripts, and that just seems somewhat unlikely.
And to Crimea, also to all of the southern part of the front lines. So they wanted to get started their major attack, the big one that we were talking about, from this direction. So they thought that they found the weak spot in Ukrainian defense and simply sent their forces across their minefields and were totally demolished. After that, they also sent the demining equipment, some sort of the tanks that may fire the special shells to destroy the mines ahead, but that equipment was also demolished by Ukrainian artillery. So they've sent those vehicles, and that is what remained after.
Remember, every vehicle can be a minesweeper once.
Some of the tanks also to back up those vehicles, but they lost all the tanks together with the special equipment that Russia is in lack of. You may say that there is no snow, it's not the current video. Actually, my friends, there is the snow, you can spot it. And here you can see some snow left, but it's recently very sunny weather, and on the south, if temperature rises a bit, snow just melts. So Russian side wanted to use this frozen temperature to move their vehicles and try to attack Vuhledar, but unsuccessfully. and it should have been the beginning of their massive attack, but for now it's failed. I'm also concerned a bit about Belarus. Russia had already used that direction for their attack 1 year ago. And today, the self-proclaimed president of Belarus spoke with his colleagues from the same military alliance like Russia, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Armenia and Kazakhstan, so they created the same blog. He said that they should choose the side of this war. And that means that he himself had already made his choice, and Belarus unfortunately supports Russia, and in that case, after that interview, I think that there is the chance that Belarus, or it's better to say, yeah, Belarus may join this conflict on the Russian side. And this might happen very soon, so while Lukashenko is following the Putin's ideas, and
Belarus has been threatening to enter this conflict every couple of months. I would be very surprised. I also think that that could have a very deleterious effect on both Belarus and Russia's ability to maintain order in Belarus.
and plays on his side. Basically, now he has nothing to lose because he already helped Russia to start the intervention 1 year ago. So he personally shares the responsibility and he will be put under trial after the war is over. Still, he is afraid for his personal safety, and really there are not many choices for Lukashenko personally. If he joins the war with his army, there will be riots in Belarus for sure. Belarus is not Russia. People will not take it as granted. On the other hand, Putin can easily get rid of Lukashenko and put his own people in charge of Belarus and start intervention. So after all, I think that there is the great chance that Belarus joins this big attack that promised by Russia. But still, even with Belarus forces, it will not be successful. This time, Ukraine is ready for the attack.
Remember, kids, if at first you don't succeed, try again.
From Belarus or any kind of other direction, since April months we were building the huge defense lines and our forces eliminated all of the connections with Belarusian territory. So if they would start that offensive mission, they would have to go across the forests, woods and swamps. Even during the Second World War, nor Hitler, neither Stalin were planning their operations across the Ukrainian-Belarusian border, because it's simply impossible to conduct it with the tanks. And with the Russian successful missions near to Vuhledar, that they lost the entire brigade, it's basically nonsense to perform at the more complex places as the north side of Ukraine. The terrain there is very difficult. And let's go again to the ground news. I like this topic. Ukraine will get the long-range missiles from the United Kingdom. And that will allow us to demolish the supply lines of the Russian forces far away.
Yeah, long-range missiles that can hit in the Crimea will very much complicate any offensive Russia launches
from the front lines. And we are speaking about possible 400 kilometers range missiles that could be launched from the jets. And here, if you just click, you may have the access to the original resource with everything that's
that complicates it too. Like, you have to send a lot of those missiles because Russia stuck a whole lot of air defense on Crimea. You'd have to fire a lot of missiles to hit some targets. So they'd have to be judicious in their execution of those attacks.
So 350 miles. That's the very long range, and if we cut supplies for Russians, they will never start the big attack on Ukraine once again. They still struggle with the forces that they have, and without proper supplies, even the million army will fail this war. Tomorrow again there will be a Ramstein meeting between the ministers of defense of many countries who support Ukraine, and we have some sort of the leaks that they will speak also about supplying Ukraine with the fighter jets. And that could be also the game changer in this war.
That didn't work out well. Fighter jets would probably be a... they don't have the capability of running seed missions, Bluestone. They can't oppose the Russian interceptors, so the Russian interceptors just shoot them down if they cross the line.
personally consider that without the aviation we cannot win this war. We have some sort of the Suhois and MiGs, but those are very old and we are in lack of the units. We are also in lack of the bombs and what they will reveal on 14th of February. As for now, we have a great support in armored vehicles. For example, those Bradleys are already in Germany and soon will go to fight in Ukraine. Also, our guys are now on a training in Germany for Leopard 2 tanks. And Putin now is really on a rush to use this time window for his big attack before Ukraine got the weaponry. And because they are in a rush, they make some terrible mistakes as in Vuhledar. And the NATO secretary...
However, I also am concerned about Ukraine rushing those new armored units to the front without properly integrating them.
Stoltenberg today in his conference said that Western allies should support Ukraine more and as fast as possible to minimize this window for Putin. Also, he said that the NATO countries may provide Ukraine with modern sophisticated jets. At the same time, it doesn't count that NATO takes part in this conflict. And yes, even Russia got their weaponry from Iran. It's been confirmed that they got 18 of the Mujahid 6 heavy drones to their army. Iran basically delivers the parts of the drones to Russia. Russia put everything together and called the drones Russian-made, and Iran used the ships to deliver those, and also Iran Air, the government airline. And while I'm recording this video, we got the information that in Russia there is one more significant explosion on a gas pipeline that connects Russian gas with the European users. I think it's the fourth explosion of the gas.
You know, those safety regulations, they'll get you every time.
Pipeline on the Russian territory during the year. We got the news from France, Canada, and United States. They asked their citizens to leave the Belarusian territory as soon as possible. It reminds me the situation last year that many countries...
Yeah, that part is alarming.
Called their citizens to leave Ukrainian territory, and some of the embassies evacuated from Kiev. So I may come out with conclusion that something is going to happen, including Belarus, and probably Belarus may start also their assault on Ukraine very soon, but it will be a great failure for their country. My friends, now press the like to this video, and also I highly recommend...
So, yeah, Belarus joining the war would not be smart for Belarus. They probably are going to run around and pretend or train Russian troops or what have you, and just sort of pin Ukrainian troops in place by looking at them funny across the border, because attacking would not work out well for them, which is what they've done so far anyway. My assessment would change if they start calling up reservists and start integrating reservists into their combat units. That might be a problem. It wouldn't be a good idea for Belarus, like I said earlier, but it might be a problem. The fact that they're stating leaving the embassy and leaving Russia, both in Belarus and Russia, that is not a great sign, though. But at the same time, I think if the administration knew for sure, because of how open they were about Russia attacking beforehand, that if they thought they had intelligence that Belarus was going to attack, they'd probably state it out loud too, so that people knew in conjunction with this call to leave Belarus. At any rate, I'm going to cut it off here. I want to thank everybody for showing up, and I hope you